Okay, today we're going to talk about the cosine function and do it in a manner very similar to the way we did the sine function previously. We're going to graph and write cosine functions and also talk about solving trigonometric equations. Okay, remember from our unit circle, we are looking at the graph of y equals the cosine of theta, and on our unit circle we were limited to the circle. We just kept going around the circle. And now we're taking that circle and opening it out onto a coordinate plane. So if theta is equal to 0, then the cosine of theta is 1. If theta is pi over 2, the cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of pi is negative 1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 excuse me, is 0. And the cosine of 2 pi is 1. So we're kind of back to where we started on the unit circle. But when we extend that circle or unwrap it onto the coordinate plane, this is what we got. This is our y-axis. This is our theta. Now, hopefully you remember from the sine that we started and ended at a 0. Well, notice here that we actually are not starting at a 0 anymore. We're starting at a max. So we start at a max, we end at a max. Halfway between is a min, and then halfway between the first two is a 0, halfway between the last two is a 0. So when I graph it, if I make this point 1 and this negative 1, then I'm starting at a max. Oh, let's go label our x. We have pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So I start at a max, I end at a max, halfway between is a min, halfway between the first two, we have 0. Halfway between the last two is a 0. So when I connect them, I get my cosine curve. Now keep in mind that's a max, so when you connect those points, you want to make sure it goes back down. It doesn't stop here and keep going in that direction. It's a max. A little shaky there on the graph. Now, hopefully you can see from our graph the amplitude. If we go between 1 and negative 1, we want half that distance. And so our amplitude is 1. And as you see from the unit circle and from our graph that our period is 2 pi. So we summarize that in our little chart. Again, and now we're going to look at those. Actually, keep in mind this right here is our parent function. This is what the key points, what we refer to often when we do our graphs. This is our parent function. And down here, we're actually going to add a few changes to it with an a and a b. So we look at y equals a times the cosine of b theta. And as we talked about before, the absolute value of a is our amplitude. B is the number of cycles in the interval from 0 to 2 pi. And again, 2 pi over b is the period of our function. Okay, another example, they give us y equals 2 cosine theta. Here's my equation. What's the amplitude? 2. How many cycles do I have? Whatever my coefficient is, so I'm going to have one cycle. What is my period? And we often use this formula. Period is 2 pi over b. So b in this case is 1, so 2 pi over 1 is 2 pi. So for that particular equation, my period was 2 pi. Now, we're going to go through and look at the examples that we have to do for our assignment. Um, Find the period and amplitude of each cosine function. Determine the values of x for which there's a maximum, minimum, and zeros. So I'm looking at a calculator screen. I have x min at negative 2 pi, so this is negative 2 pi. This is positive 2 pi. The scale is pi, so they're letting you know that they've put a tick mark at every pi units. My y min is negative 4. My max is 4. Okay? So what is the period? I started them in, I ended them in, so that means my period is going to be 2 pi. My amplitude, the highest point that I have is 2, the lowest point is negative 2, so that means that my amplitude is going to be 2, half that distance. So that's my period and amplitude. Now they're asking us to determine between 0 and 2 pi, so we only need this section of our graph. Where's a maximum value? All right, a maximum value occurs. They want to know where it is, so that means that's when we're using x in this case. So max occurs when x is equal to pi, and the min occurs when x equals 0 and 2 pi. Box each of these because that's answering our question. Okay, there's our min of 0 and our min of 2 pi. And then they're asking us where the zeros are. And hopefully you realize, remember that if we had a min at 0 and a min at 2 pi and a max at pi, then halfway between is a 0. So that means my 0 is when x equals pi over 2, and halfway between pi and 2 pi is 3 pi over 2. So that's where we have our zeros. Okay, look at this next one. That one is a little bit familiar, what you're used to seeing. This one can be a little bit trickier, but we got the same information. We're going from negative 2 pi to 2 pi. Our scale is pi, so I know that this tick mark right here is pi. This one is negative pi. My max and min go between negative 2 and 2, so this is negative 2, this is positive 2, and my scale is 1. So I know that we're going between negative 1 and 1. Now, our period, how long does it take? You can do it two different ways. You can go and say I started a max, and I'm at a max there. You might not be sure of what that is, so count how many cycles you have between 0 and 2 pi. If I have 3 cycles, that means that B has to be 3 because I went from a max to a max, that's 1, to another max is 2, to another max is 3. So that means that my period is going to be 2 pi over 3. My amplitude goes between 1 and negative 1, so my amplitude is 1. All right, let's talk about our maximum values. Where does our maximum occur? Okay, clearly we have it at x equal to 0. All right, so what is that? If my period is 2 pi, that means that from here to here has to be, excuse me, my period was 2 pi over 3. So the max to another max has to be 2 pi over 3. And then you're going to add that again. Add 2 pi over 3. 2 pi over 3 plus 2 pi over 3 is 4 pi over 3. And add another, of course we know we end at 2 pi, so the next max is at 2 pi, or 6 pi over 3. So those are our maximum values. Let's look at our minimum values. Our minimum values, we have here these three. So our minimum values are halfway between our two maxes. So if I go from 0 to 2 pi over 3, halfway is going to be pi over 3. Halfway between 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 is 3 pi over 3, which you can see is at pi. And then the next one will be between 4 pi over 3 and 6 pi over 3, which is 5 pi over 3. So those are my minimum values. Now let's look at our zeros. We have quite a few of those. All right, the first one is going to be between our max and our min, and it's halfway between. So halfway between 0 and pi over 3 is pi over 6. Then I have to go halfway between the next two. So halfway between pi over 3, that's pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3 is, if you're not quite sure, let me tell you this, you can also add these two together. So pi over 3 is the same as 2 pi over 6, and 2 pi over 6 plus pi over 6 is 3 pi over 6, which becomes pi over 2. Then we're going between, where do we go? We're just between, we went between these two, then between pi over 6, excuse me, pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. Now we have to go between 2 pi over 3 and pi. This is 4 pi over 6 and 6 pi over 6, which is 5 pi over 6. I'm going to stick to the 6's. This is 6 pi over 6 and 8 pi over 6 makes the next one 7 pi over 6. 8 pi over 6 to 10 pi over 6. Halfway between those two is 9 pi over 6, which reduces to 3 pi over 2. And then 10 pi over 6 and 12 pi over 6 is 11 pi over 6. And of course, yes, you could be adding pi over 6 to each one, however you want to think about it. It's a little bit harder to tell from your graph, but it's important to be able to understand the calculator screens that we'll be using a lot. Okay, so the next type of problem we have is to sketch one cycle of each cosine function. All right, again, to do that, we need to know what our amplitude is. Our amplitude is 3, and our period is 2 pi over b. B, of course, is 1 here, so it's just 2 pi. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 out to my fourth tick mark, make that 2 pi. Halfway is pi. My max, I'm labeling it 3. My min is negative 3. And hopefully you notice there was a negative sign. So that's going to flip our graph over the x-axis. So instead of starting at 3, I'm going to start at negative 3. So I know I start at a min. I'm going to end at a min. Halfway between will be my max. Halfway between each of those will be a 0. Those are our 5 key points that we're going to show. And then I'm going to make it look like my cosine curve. Going back up, putting my arrows on it. Okay, the next one, y equals cosine of pi over 2. My a is 1, so I'm going to go between 1 and negative 1. My period is 2 pi over pi over 2. So just to refresh your memory, we're dividing fractions. So that is 2 pi over 1 times 2 over pi. My pi's cancel, leaving me with a period of 4. No problem. 1, 2, 3, 4. Halfway between is 2. I don't have any negatives, so I'm going to start at a max. I'm going to end at a max. Halfway between is a min. Halfway between the max and mins are my zeros. And then connect. I kind of missed that. Let's try that one more time. So you got the idea. Okay? Next, we need to talk about writing a cosine function for each description. They tell me my amplitude is 2 and my period is 3. Keep in mind that my cosine function that we're looking for, y equals a times the cosine of b theta. Okay? A is positive. So if my period is pi, that's equal to 2 pi over b. So if you need to cross multiply, you'll see that b times pi equals 2 pi. My pi's cancel, leaving me with b equal to 2. So my final answer will be y equals 2 times the cosine of 2 theta. All right, look at the next one. We have an amplitude of pi, and we have a period of 2. So again, I'm going to put that period equal to 2 pi over b, cross multiply. 2b is equal to 2 pi. My 2's cancel, means that b is equal to pi. So, looks a little different than you're used to. Y equals my amplitude of pi times the cosine of pi theta. And there we have it. All right, this one gave us some information to write our graph. Now we actually have to go to the graph and get the information. So if I look at my graph, I need to figure out the amplitude. So I find out that my max is, it looks like we have tick marks of 1, 2, going by ones. So my max is 2, my min is 2. Hopefully you can see that means my amplitude is 2 because it's half the distance. And my period is a max to a max. So that means that my period is 8. Okay? That means that 2 pi over b equals 8. Again, cross multiply 2 pi equals 8b. We'll divide by 8 and simplify, so b is going to be pi over 4. So my equation will be y equals 2 times the cosine of pi over 4. We have an x this time instead of a theta, interchangeable. Y equals 2 cosine pi over 4 times x. Okay? Now, the next examples that we have are using a graphing calculator. So, we have the equation. You get out your graphing calculator and remember that we are going to put this in y sub 1 and this side in for y sub 2. And we're only looking for those intervals from 0 to 2 pi. What you need to keep in mind, you can some calculators you can put in 2 pi straight, or you can enter it into your calculator 6.28, which is 3.14 times 2. So we're going to pull up a graphing calculator and go enter in 3 cosine of t over 3. It doesn't matter if it's t or x. So I have to turn this off. So it was 3 times the cosine of x over 3. And my other equation was 2. So I'm going to put this down here so we can see it. If I hit graph, I have the graphs just to show you, but then remember that we want to only look at those values between 0 and 2 pi. So I like to go on the other side of the x-axis just so I have it. And then I'm going to make this 6.3. We were going to 6.8. So let's go look at the graph between there. And remember that when we do it this way, we're looking for that point of intersection. So with this calculator, I'm going to say, tell me what the intersection point is. And you can see that they tell me that it is 2.5232. We're looking for the x coordinate, and I believe it tells me to the nearest hundredth. So my answer will be that t, because that's what's in my equation, equals 2.52, rounded to the nearest hundredth. Now, you can also use the zero method. We've talked about that. So this one, if you're using y sub 1 and y sub 2, that is second calc and the intersect button. Okay, otherwise it's second calc and the 0 button. All right. Doing the same thing with 20 cosine t. Let's go do that one. So my equation is going to be 20 cosine of x, and I think it was equal to negative 8. So let's hit graph. And we do have, it doesn't really matter that we see the whole cosine because we actually do see 2 points of intersection. So I'm going to go to my intersect and I'm going to click on those two equations that I want to find the intersection points. So I have x equals 1.98 and x equals 4.3. And we have t again. So t equals 1.98 and 4.3. Okay, let's look at that one. It's a little different. 8 times the cosine of pi over 3 times t equal to 5. So I'll go back to my equation. I have 8 times the cosine. I think it said pi. Here's pi. Pi. It said pi over 3 times t. So I'm going to put pi over x over 3. That's the same thing as pi over 3 times t. And my other value is going to be 5. So we'll hit graph. And again, we see our 2 points of intersection. So I'm going to click on intersection, select the two equations that I want to find the intersection points. Oh, notice this. Okay, they gave me 3 because this one's actually in my window. But remember our directions only went from 0 to 2 pi. So I don't want the first one. I only want we're going to round that one to 0.86. And this will be 5.14. So we will go put those in. Again, we're dealing with t. So t was equal to 0.86 and 5.14. Okay, the last type of problems that you're going to have to do for your assignment tonight, just to make sure that you understand our cosine function, is given an equation, find the period, range, and amplitude of each function. So, y equals negative 1/2 cosine of 3 theta. The period, remember, is 2 pi over b. There's my b right there. So it's 2 pi over 3. My range. You know what? They asked me for the range. I'm going to go with the amplitude next. I kind of like it better. Amplitude's easier to find. It's 1/2. It's always positive. But remember, when it's 1/2, that tells me that my range is going to go between negative 1/2 and positive 1/2. And I write it in interval notation. I think it's easier. If you want to use set notation, you can. Um, it's brackets because it will be equal to negative 1/2 and positive 1/2. So look at the next one. The period 2 pi over 2 because that's my b. So that simplifies to pi. What's my amplitude? 1. And my range? Well, if my amplitude's 1, that means I'm going between negative 1 and 1 for now until we learn some more about it. Okay? Y equals 0.7 cosine of pi t. My period is 2 pi over pi, which simplifies. So my period is 2. My amplitude is 0.7. So hopefully you can see by now that means that my range is going to be between negative 0.7 and 0.7 inclusive. And the last problem we have, y equals 1/3 cosine of theta over 2. Period is, hopefully you can see, remember theta over 2 is the same thing as 1/2 theta. So this means that I have 2 pi over 1/2. Okay, there are my fractions again. That's 2 pi over 1 times 2 over 1. Because we divide by fractions, we keep, change, flip, multiply by the reciprocal. So that gives me a simplified version of my pi. My period is equal to 4 pi. My amplitude is 1/3. It's always my number in front. And my range is, we put a colon here because we put an interval, negative 1/3 to 1/3. So if you can do all those problems, you'll know a great deal about the cosine function and be on your way.